that we can host the first session of this series today. And I think we've also found the perfect speaker to talk about CoARA. So I'm very happy that Karen Stroobants is with us today. As you read in the introduction, she's the director at Culture-Based Consulting. She's a consultant, policy advisor, and also a previous researcher, which I think makes her a really good person to talk about this topic. We actually met Karen this year at the general meeting of the Marie Curie Alumni Association and thought this combination of your profile is really a great background also for postdocs to learn a bit more about CoARA. And to give you a bit more details about Karen, she's currently the vice chair of the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment since 2022, and she was also involved in drafting the European Agreement on reforming research assessment and various other initiatives. And if you look at her CV, I find it very impressive in how many projects and boards she was involved that all focus basically on improving research culture and research assessment. So I think we all can learn a lot from her and maybe also from her own career trajectory because she was before a postdoc, which is maybe something that many of you can resonate. She had a Marie Curie fellowship and was in the UK for a long time. So I think altogether, this is maybe something that where she can really speak out of this community and her own experience. And I'm very glad that there are persons like you, Karen, who are really working now full time on improving the system that we are all working in. So before handing over to you, I just wanted to give a few more indications on the talk today. So Karen has prepared a great presentation with a lot of information for you. We are very happy to take most of the questions in the end, unless there's something very pressing that you might ask straight away. We will also share a version of the slides afterwards, so you don't have to take notes on everything. And otherwise, we are very happy if you give us feedback afterwards on how you like this first talk of the new series. With that, Karen, I would hand over to you.
Thank you. That is a very kind introduction. And I hope I will live up to that. Let me just start with sharing the slides as the first step. So as was already introduced, today my talk will be mostly really giving you an introduction to CoARA, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. And the brief I've kind of been given is to think a bit about everything there is to know about the coalition, but also really think a bit about that postdoc perspective and the German context as part of that. So that's what I'm trying to do. I wanted to start this talk with just showing a quote that we collected through research that our secretariat that did on evaluation. And this is someone who's saying that it might be a daydream to think that we can get credit for all the wonderful things we do in academia, above and beyond just publishing articles and books. And also thinking that this would really help enrich the disciplines, but also enrich the public value of research. And I think this is a very telling quote of what a lot of researchers feel could be improved in terms of research assessment. More generally, the start of CoARA, and I should first say the start of drafting an agreement with general principles on how we want to reform existing assessment practices was really based on realizations around, first of all, that assessment processes that currently rely predominantly on journal and publication-based metrics can really be a hurdle to the recognition of diverse contributions, so all these different things mentioned in that previous quote, but also may negatively affect the actual quality and impact of the research that we produce. Furthermore, there's also contributions of that to an unhealthy research culture. And I think this is why this talk fits very nicely within this series. I can also share that my first step in the direction of working on this was actually working on a big program at the National Academy for Science in the UK, the Royal Society, where we worked first on research culture, but there was soon a realization that a lot of the issues in culture really kind of come back to how we assess and what we value and what we don't value. So for me personally, the assessment system is really a central lever in this understanding of how we can change and improve research culture more generally. And so before we continue, I think there's a tool here in the format of the slide that will, there it is, there it will pop up. So it would be good to just understand from the participants here in the room whether some of these reasons to think about reforming research assessment and some of these, well, the quote that I showed resonate with you or not, just to kind of understand maybe the baseline of where everyone's coming from. And then I'll wait for Judith to maybe see when people are answering and when answers are coming in.
Yeah, people are answering. I think we just wait another moment.
Perfect. So it looks like I'm preaching to the converted, but that's often the case. But I think, yeah, it's of course an indication that you're here, that you find this topic important, but it's still good to see that this does resonate with many of you. There's maybe a few where it doesn't resonate so much or you don't know. So hopefully we can maybe change that a bit throughout the talk today. So of course, the people we interviewed are not the only ones who found some of these problems. There was at some point, I think, a realization within the community and at different levels. Some of you will remember DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. This was really a bottom-up initiative that already really wanted to start addressing some of these issues. In Europe specifically, at some point, there was also a realization at the policy level that, and very much also building on conversations and awareness raising by DORA, that there are issues with assessment and that it is causing these limitations in terms of research quality and impact. And so at some point, the European Commission actually started to facilitate discussions. They interacted with a lot of stakeholders and they started the process of drafting an agreement. And so the next slide actually shows you a bit the timeline of that. So in the spring and autumn of 2021, the European Commission drafted this kind of scoping report. And this was really to kind of start understand what people saw as the main challenges and perhaps also as some of the potential solutions. And one of the solutions that came out of this report was to start drafting an agreement that sets out kind of common commitments for the research sector, first in Europe, but then beyond Europe, on what it is that needs to change and what could be the direction of travel in research assessment reform. As Nele introduced, I was actually the pen holder of this agreement. So that was together with the European Commission and also colleagues from the European Universities Association and Science Europe, which is an umbrella of, on the one hand, universities and on the other hand, funders in Europe. And on 20th of July, 2022, this agreement was published. So what does it say, this agreement? So it really tried to formulate a few core commitments, 10 in total, 4 core ones, 6 supporting ones, on a direction of travel that we could all agree on. And so it wasn't just drafted by that group I just mentioned. There were stakeholder engagement events, and we took really a co-creation approach. There were more than 400 organizations feeding into the draft. And so the core commitments that were agreed on were, first, that it's important to really recognize the diversity of contributions to and careers in research. Second, that to do this, research assessment is best based primarily on qualitative evaluation, though please read the second half, because often people don't see that we do state that it can be supported by the responsible use of quantitative indicators. The third commitment is to abandon the inappropriate uses in research assessment of journal and publication-based metrics. And the last one, to avoid the use of rankings of research organizations in research assessment. So as I said, to support these commitments, there are 6 supporting commitments. These are much more practical. The 3 first ones are really around committing resources, about ensuring there are activities to develop research assessment practices, but also raise awareness on those. And then the next 3 are more about exchange of information, mutual learning, communicating progress, but also making sure that any new practices are evidence-based. So before I go into how this agreement then translated in the coalition, I did want to ask a second question, whether or how many of you had already heard about this agreement or about the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment before you saw this webinar advertised, perhaps? And again, let's leave some time for people to answer. Okay, so there's definitely almost 50% who hadn't heard about it. So that will make what I will say next hopefully quite useful. So the next step was really to move from this agreement that I just described and its core commitments to action. And so if we continue the timeline, what happened next is, again, facilitated by the Commission, but this was really the point where they were handing it over to the community. There was the constitution and the launch of a coalition to oversee that these commitments would be implemented by the research community. This is CoARA, so the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. So in a nutshell, but I'll come back to many of these points in the rest of the presentation, where we are now today is that we have a coalition of more than 600, and I believe it's actually almost 700 members. We have 13 working groups that are operational, 15, actually already 60 now, I think. We need to update our slides, 16 national chapters. We're also starting to monitor the impact of what we're doing, and I'll talk a bit that as well in this presentation. And then also the work of CoARA is supported by a European project called CoARA Boost, and that's also up and running now. In terms of the members, there's an important thing to say now, because it might otherwise cause confusion later, that there are organizations who choose to sign CoARA. So that means that they both endorse the agreement publicly and also commit to change internally in their institution. But not all of those who sign become members. Those who become members, in addition to that, join our community. So our working groups, our national chapters, they also have a voice in the direction of CoARA because they are part of our General Assembly, which is the highest body of our governance. And of course, they also have more opportunities to interact within the community. So this is a distinction to just set out here, as it will be relevant in some of the other things I will be talking about. So I already touched on some of the communities that we have. So first of all, of course, there are our members. So these are all the members who, if we go back to the previous slide, and sign and decide that they want to be a member of the coalition. One of their key aims is to develop an action plan on how they will implement the commitments and then also distribute that action plan. They will also be asked 5 years after signing the agreement to report back on how they are doing against their self-developed action plan. The second community within CoARA are the working groups that I already mentioned. And I'll come back a bit to these in detail, but basically these are communities of practice around thematic themes. Versus our national chapters. These are set up voluntary by the stakeholders in a given country, and they're much more focused on discussing, exchanging knowledge and discussing specific issues to a national context across different types of organizations in that country. Then we also have something called cascade funding. This means that we are distributing grants to institutions to help them with implementing assessment reform. And finally, we are also hosting a lot of events, on the one hand, to create awareness, but also to make progress on the reform itself. So I already mentioned our General Assembly. CoARA has a few governing bodies. The highest one is the General Assembly of all our members. So this is our highest level of decision-making. But it's also, the coalition's direction is also steered by a steering board, which is elected and has the oversight of our success strategy and sustainability. And as Nela said, this is where I fit in. I am the vice chair currently of the steering board. We have elections in December coming up. So then we will see a turnover of approximately half of our steering board. This is all supported by a secretariat. So this is a group of people who are really ensuring the smooth operation of CoARA, supporting us. They helped us with these slides, for example, but they also are really nurturing the CoARA communities and coordinating all the efforts across the projects behind CoARA. If I now come back to each of these groups in a bit more detail, so the first group is our membership, and this is an overview from September. I think we actually are a bit higher now. We're almost, I think we were 699 members last time I checked. It keeps going up. We keep seeing this momentum. But last time this data was collected, you can see an overview of what it looks like. And as you see, the majority of our members are universities and their associations, followed by research centers and infrastructures, then academies, learned societies, associations of researchers, funders, and last, also other nonprofit organizations. And oh, sorry, I forgot, there is also actually a small percentage, and a percentage we would like to see increase, of also national and regional authorities or agencies that are involved in research assessment. So quite a broad spread of members, also quite a broad spread of where those members are based. So we have now members from around 25% of the countries in the world. You can, of course, see from the graph that this is still the majority based in Europe, but we are really happy to see increased engagement beyond Europe in different continents. And the next slide might represent this even better. So this gives you an overview of the countries where we have presence, with the color coding giving an idea of the strongest presence currently in European countries: Spain, Italy, Poland, and France. And as I said, we are very happy also to have among our new CoARA members this year, members in Panama, Nigeria, and Tanzania, clearly expanding the scope of the membership. Of course, as I said, it's not only about growing our membership, it's very much also about supporting our members in implementing the agreement and implementing the commitments. And these are just some examples of members sharing with us where they have put in place their action plans. And not only that, but also how putting in place those action plans has really helped them think about their own practices around research assessment, and has been really strategic in that journey. And we are also starting to analyze what is in those action plans to really also map how the different narratives in those action plans map against the different commitments. At the moment, there is a full text corpus of all these statements available that can also be used by meta-researchers. I think we're actually doing efforts to make this even in a better format at the moment. But for now, it's available as a Zenodo library, so people can openly see what these action plans include and how different types of institutions are working towards improving their research assessments. If there is interest to know about how German associations are doing this, there are some in our membership. There are 40 organizations from Germany. And again, here you can see that most of those are universities, but there's a range of other types of organizations that are involved. Moving on to the CoARA working groups and national chapters. So I think in terms of level of activity, our members are much focused on their internal activity and how they internally change assessment. Our working groups and national chapters are looking a bit beyond that internal commitment. So the working groups, as I said, are really thematically based groups that come together to work on specific challenges against the commitment. So these are some of the themes. There are 13 in total that are being addressed. And you can see there's groups on academic career assessment, so broadening out from just research assessments. There's also groups looking at experiments, groups that touch on topics that I think are closely related, but can be integrated differently in research assessment, such as ethics, multilingualism, but also inclusiveness, for example. Some groups are looking at specific disciplines, for example, one on research evaluation in the social sciences and humanities, and one also more focusing on applied practice-based research. And then the one at the bottom is looking at the alignment of research assessment systems in the biomedical disciplines. So there's a few of those ones as well. And then I did specifically also want to mention that there is an early and mid-career researchers working group. So looking really at the assessment of that career group specifically. And this is a researcher-driven working group that is really trying to address the specific needs and also the vulnerability in the change that we're trying to affect of early and mid-career researchers. So there's a contact emailed here because they are really happy to be contacted by people that feel they belong in this group and that would like to engage with the working group. In terms of the highlights of the working groups, so this is just to say that these working groups not only have their internal meetings, but they do a lot of things to also engage with the CoARA community and also the broader research community. So a lot of these events are actually open to a much broader range than just CoARA members. And these are just some examples of these types of engagements. They can be surveys, they can be sometimes focus groups, sometimes webinars where people can share their opinions towards the outputs that each of these working groups are developing. Again, there is substantial German representation in our working groups. This gives you a quick overview, but there are German organizations represented in our working groups on open infrastructures, on academic career assessment, on the thematic one that I mentioned on the biomedical disciplines, the transformations working group. There's also German representation in the responsible metrics and indicators group. And DFG is also represented in 3 of them, the one on improving practices in assessment for research proposals specifically, the one on recognizing and rewarding peer review, and the one I just highlighted on the early and mid-career researchers. So already quite a good engagement across the working groups. Then the counterpart of our working groups are national chapters. As I said, these are communities that really enable knowledge exchange, mutual learning, but also specific discussions on the country context for organizations within a given country or region. Here as well, we are happy that we welcomed 5 new national chapters this year, among them actually Germany, alongside Andorra, Portugal, Sweden, and the UK. And this is something that's kind of running with the working groups. We do a regular call to form new working groups with the national chapters. They can apply throughout the year as they feel ready to do so. As I said, there is a German national chapter. And so this national chapter brings together CoARA members and organizations from Germany. It shares progress on CoARA's implementation internally, but also discusses and coordinates matters that are specific to the German research landscape. They also do local outreach. So the national chapters, in contrast to the working groups, are open to non-members. So it's really to create dialogue across a national context, also including creating awareness of those who might not have signed yet. And I do know that there's been quite a good interaction between the national chapter in Germany and the German Rectors Conference, for example. The chapter meets monthly, and again, there is a contact here in case anyone is interested in more information. So a final activity that I mentioned already is CoARA's support for local change. So this can be seen in CoARA being shown on the institutional website of a lot of organizations, but where we mostly support is in local events, like actually this one today. So that could be an example that we show next time. These are some other examples of where CoARA has been supporting local events to raise awareness of research assessment reform or to seek inputs on the types of outputs that we're trying to create across our different activities. The second way for creating local support is through our cascade funding. So this is really funding that we distribute that is specifically aimed at facilitating institutional change. So it's more than half of that budget of the European project I mentioned earlier is being redistributed to institutions who are willing to implement the commitments. And the idea is really that they use that budget to carry out really concrete, tangible changes to their policies and their processes. Of course, in line with the agreement and the commitments in that agreement. This could include exchanges, this could include pilots and implementation of new policies and processes. And so the cascade funding supports 3 types of projects in line with that objective. Some of these are institutional change projects, so implementing and paving the way for lasting change. Some are teaming calls, where it's really more about knowledge exchange between different institutions. And others are institutional pilots, where people want to try a new innovation and still then be able to make a decision as to whether it works or not in their context. So this gives you an overview of all the different things that we do. We are also starting to try and understand whether all those activities are having an impact. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about impact, we're very conscious that it's really a combination of all these activities that contributes to that impact. So we are already seeing some changes, especially in the European landscape, where there is more attention for how we weigh prestige-based indicators. There's rethinking of the balance between career history versus future potential of candidates, and also support for greater diversity in career paths. And I think the most notable, probably for this group, change that we've seen is one in the European Research Council. They have really changed how they assess candidates. In line with CoARA, and we know that we had a lot of conversations with them about it, so we do know that that's an impact directly of what we have been doing. We also are tracking how the CoARA aims and objectives are reflected in the scholarly discourse, and we do see in many languages that there's really a lot of discussion around CoARA. This doesn't always mean univocal support. There's definitely also critics, but we also see that as a sign of impact, because they usually don't take the time to write until they see that the status quo is being challenged. And that's, of course, what we are trying to achieve. And then this is a point, I think, before I continue, where I've given you a lot of information. I'd like to talk a bit more also about how researchers can get involved. And it would be nice to understand, having heard a lot more now about CoARA and its different mechanisms, whether this has already spurred your interest in assessment, or is it clear how you could get involved as an early career researcher, or does that warrant a bit more attention?
Just waiting a moment for people to use the poll.
Yeah. Gives me a chance to take another sip. Thanks, Judith. So I think there's definitely a majority who at least have been a bit more interested, or some definitely. And then a minority that doesn't know, or just say they have too many other things to do, which I think is not unfair given the pressures we have. Of course, the whole idea of making changes here is that part of that is to ensure that we have more distinctive careers, where perhaps not everyone will need to continue to do all the different things academics do today. So going forward a bit on how you can get involved in the reform as an early to mid-career researcher. So first of all, there might be reasons why you find it important to get involved. These might be around the fact that, first of all, it's likely that you as an early career researcher will be most affected by the changes, because they take time, but they will be felt in several years' time. And this is a time where maybe some of the senior academics today have by then retired, and you are the ones who are in leading positions. I do think some of you might also want to shape the environment in which you are working, because if the assessment system changes, it's likely to have an impact on culture and on the ways of working in academia. And what we also have heard of several early career researchers that we have talked with is that they are experiencing a tension between what is needed to advance their research, what is best for their research, versus what they need to do to advance their career and what is best for their career. So hopefully it's also a possibility to address some of those tensions. Of course, on the other hand, it's not only about why you might want to participate. I think it's also important to say that for CoARA success, those people who are already involved find it important that early career and mid-career researchers get involved, partly because they are most affected, and it's really the right thing that they are involved directly in the reform, but also because we are really trying to realize commitments towards a more diverse and equitable assessment. And that means also taking into account the diverse views of the stakeholders that this affects. And then, of course, again, the final point reiterates that the reform really should remain in the hands of those that are primarily affected by the change, and that is the research community. So as a researcher, there are, of course, several things you can do. You can consider joining CoARA's working groups, for example, signing up to follow our progress, but also see where there are opportunities to engage in surveys or in webinars to share your opinion on what is happening. And of course, you can also in the day-to-day consider reflecting on your own values in how you review and how you publish in your own practice, but also think about the ways that you evaluate, because some of you might start to be in a stage where you're asked to do peer review, where you're asked to evaluate, and that will probably increase as you advance in your career. So there's also questions there about, are you in a position to then challenge the status quo once you become the evaluator? I also personally summarized some of my suggestions for early career researchers to be part of the solution in an article a few years ago. And my main points were that definitely everyone can join the conversation. This can be joining a CoARA working group, but this can have many other forms. There's many other levels of discussion on research assessment reform going on. This can be, as I said, in the form of sharing your insight and opinions. Again, CoARA regularly distributes surveys, but not only CoARA, your funder in your own country or your own institution might ask for your input, and it's important to make your voice heard. You can also on a day-to-day basis contribute to changing expectations and really help shape what success means. One example that I often use is, when someone tells you that they've achieved a publication in a journal, the most often the first question asked is still, in which journal? We can all change that narrative by asking, okay, what was it about? Or a question that maybe doesn't immediately just refer to the journal title. So that's a way of helping to change the expectations of researchers, especially towards more junior colleagues. Those who find that they can put the effort in could also become an ambassador for change. One thing there could be raising awareness of CoARA and DORA and initiatives like these. And then the last point I already mentioned is to consider really broad criteria in research or assessment where you are the one who is evaluating, and ensure that you as a person are a responsible assessor and that you can challenge the status quo where you see that perhaps others are not being responsible. So again, here I had another question on whether people feel confident if they would be seeing inappropriate assessment processes. Would they be confident to challenge those behaviors? So that's, I think, a very important lever that we all have, and it would be interesting to see how that confidence picture looks like already also for this group. So I'll give a bit of time again. I'm sure Judith will share once we have enough answers collected. Any results already?
Maybe this one needs a bit more thought to select an option. There we
Oh,
go.
that's a very mixed picture. Okay. But I'm happy that at least some of you feel a bit more confident now that you have maybe a bit more of the argumentation from the talk today. But definitely also still a proportion that wouldn't feel confident, and that I think in itself is maybe something to address through some of the following talks on research culture, because I think there's other aspects that feed into that. I also wanted to just, before I really end here and open the floor for questions, also just get a final kind of take. We've asked a question about involvement earlier, but now that we kind of come at the end and you have a better understanding of how you could potentially get involved, whether there is appetite from people in the room to hear more about CoARA, potentially maybe even get more actively involved. And we'll give that a bit of time again.
Just show business. It's not oh, we hope you get there, you know, it doesn't 6 months. It's like, no, we really need to. Yeah. I'm sure there is.
That's hopefully clear that there is definitely a lot of opportunities, and it looks like definitely a lot of people want to maybe follow the progress, and some also would like to get involved. So that is really good to know. And so with that, the last slide actually just gives a bit of an overview of a lot of the useful links for those who want to get involved or sign up to the newsletter. So please, these slides will be distributed. Please do follow up those who are interested in action, do engage with our working groups, engage with our webinars, and with all the information that we are trying to distribute to show where we're making progress. And then with that, Nela, I will maybe stop the share because we will distribute the information after. I think there were already some comments in the chat, so I'll maybe have a quick look at those, and then I'm very happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. That was a great overview. I think the links in the chat were mostly what I posted in between your talk. But now I invite everyone to maybe raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly, or also ask it in the chat if you don't want to speak up, and I'll pass it on to Karen. And maybe to start, I have a few kind of clarification questions. So, for example, if I'm a postdoc now and I'm not sure if my institution has signed CoARA, could I still join some of the activities or get involved somewhere?
Yes, definitely. So there are some restrictions for the working groups. We are asking that those who join those are representatives of member organizations, because we see it as a benefit of the members that they are able to contribute to those. However, the working groups do often ask input beyond the membership. So when they set up webinars or when they send out surveys, they're often trying to reach the broader research community or specific segments of the research community, which could be early career researchers. Mm-hmm. So those are usually really good opportunities for anyone who wants to have a voice to get involved. And then at the organizational level, a lot of the national chapters, although not all of them, so I don't want to generalize completely, but a lot of national chapters, and I know the one in Germany takes that approach, do open at least part of their meetings to non-members to also create awareness of the initiative in their national context.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that's very helpful to maybe understand a bit better how one can fit in if you're like a postdoc, let's say, and not really involved in the structures at the moment. I will maybe read out a few questions that came in now in the chat. One is from Jürgen Schneider. He asked about like the difference between the institutes who signed CoARA and those who have created an action plan. I guess you also see the question there, that a lot of institutions signed CoARA, about 800, and only like about 118 created an action plan. Does it make sense for researchers to nudge their research institute to create an action plan? Can we point out to them the resources that might help to create an action plan?
Very good question. So the first thing to understand is that the organizations are asked within a certain time frame to create their action plan. And so some of those organizations who are among those, it's 700, I think, are signatories, about 800. They only signed recently. So we all ask them to create their action plan within a year. However, more than 400 organizations have already been a member for more than a year. So there is a disconnect between the number of action plans that are actually there and the number that we would be expecting. So first of all, if researchers are in a position to nudge their research institutions, yes, please do so. I think any encouragement is good. We have also put in place a strategy to increase this number, and we are organizing several webinars where we ask those who have already created action plans to talk about their experience, to talk about the resources they've used, to hopefully help those who have experienced challenges with already doing that. So there is also support from the Secretariat to help with that. And then
perfect, yeah. And I guess the national chapters are also the idea, no? To discuss
yes,
kind of
definitely.
challenges.
Yeah, to really help implementation at the local level, definitely.
We would stop the recording now so that you maybe also feel a bit more confident to speak up and ask your questions directly.